Hello and welcome to yesterday's airlines. As we reach the end of the year, just a couple more of these release ranking videos likely to get made. And this week's version covers the NG models December announcements, which were announced probably a week and a half ago or so. So apologies that it's a little bit late, but obviously had other content to get out. And let's face it, NG has not had a great year. In fact, it's been really very disappointing. They've tried quite a few things this year, but frankly, most of them haven't worked very well. So you've got the NG Lite, and I'm massively on the fence about that and the way they're using it. You've got the Ultimate Collection, which, again, it started quite well, I think, last year, but then it's kind of fizzled out into kind of a nothing, and arguably it's not worth the time. And then you've just got the choices, the model releases. They've not been particularly diverse, they've not been particularly interesting, and a huge swathe of NG's mold catalogue has just vanished into the ether. And we're not just talking older molds like the TriStar and 757, but we're also talking about the new molds, of which they had so many, like the A340s, which have never appeared, and the 767s and the MD-80s, which have briefly flickered and then vanished. And I had heard there were going to be potentially some 767s and MD-80s announced this month, but there aren't. So that turned out not to be true. And instead we have a collection of largely similar models to previous months. Lots of modern aircraft, lots of duplication of variants, so minor changes for registration or livery, and not a lot that's fresh. But I do have to say that this is a better month, I think, than last month. There is a little bit more freshness. So we will get on and check out these releases in a moment. Before I do that, obviously, don't forget to chuck a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Really appreciate everyone that watches my content. Thank you very much. Check me out also on my other social channels at YesterdayAirlines on Instagram and on Facebook, and yesterdaysairlines.com, the website where the hub of the work I do resides. But let's get on and check out the December announcements from NG. So there are 27 models announced in this December set, and I'm actually going to run through these in a rather non-standard fashion. I'm going to run through them in kind of the order of the part numbers this time around. And that means we actually end up starting with what are possibly two of the more interesting releases for the month, and a return of the Boeing 747 SP mold, which has not seen much usage. In fact, the last time it was used was for a repeat Air China in May, and then there was a couple of repeat Qantases in January, and other than that, really has been nothing this year, and very little in the year before, to be honest, and arguably not a lot even in the year before. In fact, these two 747 SPs this month make it 36 SPs that have been made, and that is across a 4-year period. It sounds like not actually that bad a number, but when you look at the amount of repetition of the releases here, then you'll find that the coverage of airlines is actually pretty poor. Anyway, this month what we've got are a couple of Iranian SPs, and they've made Iran Air before, but they've never made the all-white, Euro-white scheme version of the livery. And this month we've got two. We've got EP I Alpha Alpha and I Alpha Charlie. Now, I Alpha Alpha has got grey engine cowlings and is named Persian Gulf. I Alpha Charlie is in the last flight scheme, which had basically similar, but with white engine cowling. So that's the primary difference between these two. It's the colour of the engine cowlings. So it's not a dramatic difference. I Alpha Alpha also has a grey belly too. So there is some difference in them, and there is also a slight difference in the size of the tail logo as well. So there is a difference. It's not dramatic. Basically, I'm really pleased to see these. I know the SP nose. There's been a lot of talk about SPs. About 747 noses with NG, but I've always liked the SPs that they've delivered, and I would like to see more of them. These two aren't the most exciting SPs they could make, but it's good to see them nonetheless. I'm going to put one of these up into High Flyer, and I'm going to put the other one into Workhorse. Next up, we've got models which were inevitable. Now, I believe these were voted for in the wish list thing, but the reality is NG was always going to make this. And, even though you may get some points if you buy the models, fundamentally it's like, well, it's the same point as putting up wishes that they're going to make. Anyway, just from my eye, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. But regardless, of all of that, what I'm talking about here are KLM A321 Neos. And in fact, there are two announced this month. PH Alpha X-Ray Alpha, which is the Swallowtail, and PH Alpha X-Ray Bravo Peach Blossom. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce the Dutch names. Okay, so there have already been announced 3 other versions of Alpha X-Ray Alpha from Phoenix, Aeroclassics, and Gemini, the first 2 of which are already out. Clearly, this NG version is going to be the best of the bunch because of the mould. I've seen some complaints about the colour of the belly being used and the fact that it's, white bottom and it should be grey. But the reality is, it's such an incredibly light shade of grey that, in my opinion, it's not really even noticeable. And nobody else seems to be getting it right either. So if you're picking between the 5 releases that are available, then these 2 NG releases are clearly going to be the best versions. So I'm going to put one of these up into Supersonic because it is clearly going to be the best, and it's quite an important aircraft for the future of European aviation. I'll put the other one into Workhorse. Next up, we've got a series of Wizz Air A321s. In fact, there are 6 releases for Wizz Air this month, which does show quite a lot of duplication, but perhaps the sort of duplication that doesn't bother me too much. They are all different to a degree, and they cover airlines across the Wizz Air portfolio, so they're not all just for the Hungarian version of Wizz Air. There has been 19 other Wizz Air releases in the past, or announced releases, mostly A321s, a few A320s thrown in. Most of them have been delivered by, well, there are some old ones by Phoenix in 2015 to 2018 period, but most of the more recent versions have come from JC Wings, though there were a trio from NG in 2020. So there's a reasonable spread, but there's still quite a lot of potential here. What we've got in these releases, if we run through each of them, first up, we've got the Team Hungary version, which has been announced by JC Wings as well. So that one, HALGI, has been announced by JC Wings, but they still haven't released their one. It's going to be massively inferior to this one because of the mould. So that's actually quite a nice scheme and pretty unique. Next up, there is a Wizz Air UK A321neo, G Whiskey Uniform Kilo Yankee, and they have announced, or there have been 1 or 2 Wizz Air UKs before. They did Whiskey Uniform Kilo Lima NG in 2020, but this one's got the mast cockpit, so it does look quite significantly different. Then we've got HALVW, the Hungarian version, which is effectively the same, just Hungarian registered. And then we've got the Maltese version, NH Watt, which again is fundamentally the same, just Maltese registered. And then following on from that, there are a pair of Wizz Air Abu Dhabi versions, and these 2 are registered A6 Whiskey Alpha Charlie and A6 Whiskey Alpha Delta. Wizz Air Abu Dhabi has been produced before. These 2 are both CEOs, by the way. I think. Yep, look like a CEO. A6 Whiskey Alpha Charlie and Whiskey Alpha Delta. They, like I say, there have been some Wizz Air Abu Dhabi models before. I think maybe just one though, and that looks like it was made by JC. I'm investing too much time in an airline I couldn't care less about, frankly, but it is nonetheless not upsetting me dramatically. What I'm going to do with these is I'm going to put various ones in different places. I'm going to put the Team Hungary version up into High Flyer. I'm going to put the Wizz Air UK Neo up into Supersonic, actually, I think that's a strong release. I'll put the next one, the Hungary version, down into High Flyer. I'll put the Maltese into Workhorse, and I'll put one of the Abu Dhabis up into High Flyer and one of them into Workhorse. So I just mixed those around a little bit, but I do think that there's a reasonable amount of potential there for those Wizz Air, even though they don't bother me or interest me really at all. But I think that, you know, it's a major European airline. It's got a lot of different areas to it. I think that there's probably a market for those. Okay, next up we've got 5 A350s, which we can get through quite quickly. First two are Thai Airways International, wearing the Star Alliance scheme. We've got HSTH Uniform, and we've got TH Quebec. There have been quite a lot of Star Alliance Thai A350s announced or released recently. We've got an Aviation 400 one, which still hasn't been released, even though it was announced more than a year ago. We've got a Phoenix, and there have been JC Wings as well. These ones will be the best because the mould is the best, and that's why these aren't upsetting me too much for that reason. If you look at the actual two artworks, there are tiny differences in terms of the windows and the positioning of the titles, but they're very, very small. I'm going to put one of these up into High Flyer, the other one into Workhorse. And similarly, the next pair up are also Star Alliance releases. These ones are Air China B308M, and the only difference here is that one's Ultimate Collection and one's not. Again, I'll put one of these into High Flyer and the other one into Workhorse. I am quite looking forward to one of those, I have to admit. There have been Air China Star Alliance versions before, but only from JC Wings and Phoenix, and they're not going to be as nice as this one. And the last A350 for this month is in the colours of Air France, and it is registered F Hotel Uniform Victor Juliet, and it's got some, I think it's supposed to have a Paris 2024 sticker. It's really hard to see. Is that on the front? Yeah, it's a tiny Paris 2024 sticker at the front of the aeroplane. Really very, very small. They have made two, NG that is, have made two Air France A350s before. They look so similar. I mean, one of them is effectively the same. It's, the difference between the two has been the positioning of the winged seahorse logo. But one of them, FHT Yankee Lima, is got this version of the scheme on it, and it just doesn't have a tiny little Paris logo. I mean, I was going to chuck this one into Workhorse. It really, you know, again, Air France, major airline, so actually I can understand why you're releasing these, and this is a few years after they've released the previous ones, so it's not, you know, shocking, and they'll probably sell, but it's really a very, very tiny livery version that no one really probably was asking for. Next up, we've got some A330s, which, again, kind of straddle that line between, you know, okay, I can understand why they're being released, and also, you know, they're not particularly interesting. First up, there's a pair of Delta Airlines versions. First is a Series 200, N857 November Whiskey. And looking back through, there have been very few Delta A330-200s. The last release was in 2015, and that was Aero Classics. And previous to that, there have been a couple of Geminis, both presumably on the old seamed mould. So this one actually is very worthy of release, and I think is a strong contender this month. I'm going to put that one up into High Flyer. The next model is a Series 300. This one is less worthy, I think. N815 November Whiskey is the reg. There was a release from Gemini in October. There was also an NG release in 2021. There have been 3 or 4 previous releases by Gemini and Aero Classics before that. So there aren't as few as there are for the Series 200s, and the quality is better because there have been more recently. So I'm going to put that one into Workhorse. Now, it used to be the case that you could rely on NG to do some really unusual airlines, and that has kind of fallen out of favour in recent times, and they tend to just do the same airlines, just lots and lots of livery variant versions for them, especially special schemes. But the next airline I hadn't even heard of until this release set, or at least it had passed me by, and it doesn't happen very often. The airline is called Luke Air, and it's kind of an airline that only flickered briefly into existence because it is a relaunch, or it was an attempted relaunch, of the Italian charter airline Blue Panorama, which had been around for a good 20 years or so. They announced in 2019 that they were going to rebrand. It never really happened. COVID got in the way. It was all very messy. They did kind of briefly rebrand, and then they went bankrupt in October 2021, basically. So they did very, very briefly rebrand into this Luke Air airline, which is got this bizarre livery, and then they disappeared. Quite why NG Models feels the need to release this is beyond me. And in a month where there was a good diversity of interesting airlines, I wouldn't be at all peeved by this. But now I'm looking at this list and I'm seeing quite a boring set of ordinary airlines they always release, plus this really weird Luke Air. I'm like, you know, there's so much better material, and they're kind of wasting zinc somewhat on these Luke Air models. I know there are probably some people interested in these, but frankly, I'm not one of them. I mean, the scheme itself is weird. I know, not good way. It's not good weird. It looks basically like a Frisian cow, which has been coloured really oddly with yellow and blue as opposed to being black and white. But the scheme has got these random splodges on it. It just looks awful. And Luke Air is a really awful name for an airline unless you're called Luke. Maybe it's pronounced Looky. I don't know. I'm not even going there. It's just rubbish. It's a rubbish scheme. It's a nothing airline. Blue Panorama was a something airline. This rebrand, which lasted, you know, a couple of months, is a nothing airline. I'm not entirely sure they even had both of these A330s in service. I think maybe only one of them actually saw revenue service before the airline went under. Anyway, what we've got here is they're both Maltese registered, 9H RT uniform and 9H Papa Tango November. There's tiny differences by the look of the artwork in the schemes, very, very small. Yeah, I don't know what to do with these, to be honest. I want to applaud the fact they're making an unusual airline, but it pisses me off that they're making such a pointless airline. So I'm still going to put one in high flyer, and I'll put the other one in the workhorse. But I'm feeling that's perhaps a little generous. And maybe I am being a little generous with putting some of these in the workhorse, which could easily maybe fall down into gas guzzler, considering the repetitious nature of them. But obviously not feeling as annoyed as I was last month with NG. And the next pair of A330s, the last pair of A330s here, these are both Chinese. So ironically, they are probably, from my perspective, the most interesting versions. We've got a pair of Hainan Airlines Series 300s. We've got B1020. That's got the old HNA logo near the cockpit. And we've got B5905, which has got the newer HNA logo near the cockpit. And that is the primary difference between the two, though if you look at the artworks again, you'll notice that there is a different configuration for each of these aircraft, and B1020 has got a 4-door configuration, whereas B5905 has got a hat rack door in place of door 3. So there is subtle differences, but they are quite subtle. When we talk about Hainan A330s in general in the scale, these make it up to 13 that have been made, Series 300s that is. There haven't been any since 2018, and most of the ones that have been made by Phoenix, with a couple of slipped in by Air Classics and JC Wings. I've got several of the Phoenix ones. They're quite nice. They've got several special schemes that are being worn. These ones will be better, but probably not so much better that I'm going to replace the existing versions I own. I'm still tempted to put them both in the high flyer though, but that's perhaps my China bias going there. So I imagine most people wouldn't see these as being high flyer, but actually that HNA logo change is enough to make them interesting to me, as nerdy as that is. So yeah, I'm going to put those in high flyer. They probably don't deserve it. Okay. Now that is kind of the bulk of the release set out of the way, and we've still got 6 models to discuss. But 4 of these 6 are fantasy models. The first one up is a 777-300. It's BA Landor again. It's GSTBF again, and I say again because they released one in May 2023. I'm not sure if the engines are different on these. I honestly couldn't care less. You know, they've already released one, they're releasing another one. We didn't need the first one. I mean, I'm not against fantasy models necessarily, but I do like the fantasies to be bordering on realistic. And I'm not sure a Landor 777-300 is, you know, it's not. I guess what I'm trying to say is for fantasy models, I like them to have been, say, like their Malaysian 777 last month, which I didn't even like that much. You know, where an airline's ordered it and they didn't take delivery. In this case, the delivery change happened quite a long time before a 777-300ER entered service. You know, it was 1997, wasn't it, that Landor scheme was removed. When did this aircraft first fly? It was in the 2000s, wasn't it? Early 2000s, I think. It's just not a very plausible fantasy. I'm just going to put this one into Gas Guzzler, I think. And the fact it's also a re-release of fantasy, it's like, really? Next up, we've got a non-fantasy model, but doesn't make it any less pointless. We've got yet another version of the last 747 in those, and I call them primer, but they're not, in this green coat, you know, pre-paint scheme. The difference here between this and the previous version, as I understand it, is that this version doesn't have the little pictures on the side that talk about it being the last 747. So it's such a small difference. I honestly don't know why you prefer it without them. Just pointless. A pointless release. I'm going to guess guzzle that one too. I just, you know, annoying. And the next model up, you know, is actually really quite cool, but it's completely fantasy as well. And in that case, it's like, oh my lord, come on. Do we need it? Do we really need this? So this one's an Atlas Air / Qantas half and half 747-8, registered N856 GT. I don't know who's asking for this stuff, frankly. Who's asking for it? Who needs it? I don't know. Maybe some Australians clitters. I mean, it does look cool, but it's never going to happen. So, yeah, just pointless. I'm going to gas guzzle that one as well. Really not interesting me. There are another couple of 747-8 freighters this month as well, and these are also fantasy versions. These are actually NG Light 2, and the only NG Light releases this month, and they're both Air China cargo. They've got different versions of the cargo scheme on them. No one cares. I don't really know who's asking for these. Maybe the Chinese care about them, but if they do, they're Wallies. Air China never operated the aircraft, never going to operate the aircraft. Pointless fantasies. I'm just going to gas guzzle those as well. And that leaves us one model to discuss. Southwest Airlines 737 MAX 7. It is the second MAX 7 release for Southwest, which NG have made. They've already made N7203 uniform, and now they've got N7207 Zulu. Yeah, these obviously haven't been delivered yet because the aircraft still isn't certified. It'll look fine. There's probably some discussion about the colour or the blue that they're using NG. I don't be bothered to think about it too much, to be honest. It just doesn't interest me. And I'm going to put that one into Workhorse. And that brings us to the end of the video. And I've sort of said a couple of times in this video, you know, I'm a little bit bored of the release sets NG are putting out. In fact, more than a little bit. And I can't even bother to discuss some of the models that much because they just seem to serve no real purpose. There's such re-releases. There's no real, you know, excitement generated by them. That's not to say that they're all bad. There's certainly some decent releases in this set. But once again, you've got a 27 model set where you could easily slash half of them and nobody would miss them. And you could probably, to be honest, from my perspective, slash a good 2/3 of the remaining half and it wouldn't bother me because the models that are being released just don't excite me very much. There's a couple in here that I'm certainly interested in getting. I will get one of the Iranian SPs. I probably will get the Air China A350. Yeah, maybe a Hainan A330. I don't know. I doubt it. And that's about it, really. So it's not a great set. It's not as bad as the previous month's set, I think. But there's still a lot of treading water going on. And I do wonder whether NG will ever get its mojo back at this point or whether the company is just kind of winding down, I don't know, or slipping out of relevance. I don't really know, but it's just not hitting the marks. It's not doing anything that can get people excited. And I've seen a lot of criticism and a lot of annoyance at NG, and I share a lot of that now, and it's getting very hard to understand what they're doing, unless they really are struggling financially, which maybe they are, maybe they aren't, I don't know. And increasingly it doesn't matter that much because they're not producing models I'm interested in anyway, and so I'm looking elsewhere at other brands like Aviation 400 or Panda, and obviously the other brands, JC Wings, Aero Classics and such, for more interesting models that fit my collection criteria, which is an enormous collection criteria. I don't just collect classic aircraft. You know, I collect pretty much anything before 2000. I collect a good chunk of Chinese after that. I do collect some other aircraft in that space. I collect some military stuff nowadays too. I collect a wide range of airliners, and NG are not hitting that quite substantial chunk of possibilities often enough for me. Instead, they're producing a lot of relatively samey and ordinary models. Never mind, hey. Hopefully 2025 will get better for NG, and we'll see them producing more MD-80s, more 767s, and a more interesting set of models overall. I certainly wish them the best, and I wish everyone else who's listening and watching this video the best as well. And I hope you guys have a great Christmas. If I do not get to speak to you again before then, I will be doing a model of the year roundup video, so keep an eye out for that. That'll probably come in the week after Christmas. But for now, thank you very much for watching. That's all from me. Goodbye from yesterday's airlines.